I'm going to tell you something I've never revealed to anyone. It was the day my own son tried to have me committed to a nursing home against my will, while I pretended not to understand what was happening. The doctor's look of pity still burns in my memory. "Mrs. Eleanor, do you understand why you are here today?" he asked, as if I were 5 years old. My son Richard held my hand with false compassion, whispering, "Mom, it's for your own good." In that moment, I knew I had lost control of my own life. Or at least, that's what they thought. My name is Eleanor Williams, and I am about to turn 78. I was born in Mississippi in difficult times, when being a black woman meant carrying two burdens on your back. My mother cleaned the houses of white families so I could study, and she taught me never to bow my head. "Eleanor," she would say, "you have to be twice as smart and 3 times as careful." Words I have carried with me my whole life. I worked as a nurse for almost 40 years in a Baltimore hospital. I saved lives, held the hands of the dying, and saw the world slowly change around me. I married young to James, had 3 children, and thought I had built a fortress called family. James left too soon, a heart attack at 59. That's when I realized that a widow with her own house and a small savings becomes an easy target, even for those who should protect her. Richard, my eldest son, was always ambitious. He graduated with a business degree, married Caroline, a woman who never hid her discomfort in my presence. They had 2 beautiful children, my grandchildren, Aidan and Lisa, who visited me less and less as they grew up. I understood children have their own lives, their own priorities. But something changed when James left. The glances, the whispered conversations that would stop when I entered the room, Richard's sudden insistence on helping with my finances. "Mom, you shouldn't have to worry about bills and investments at your age," he would say, leafing through my bank statements at my dining room table. I would smile and thank him, pretending not to notice when he photographed documents with his phone. At first, I thought it was just concern, but I soon realized what was really happening. My house in the Baltimore suburbs, which James and I had bought with so much sacrifice in the 70s, had appreciated considerably. The land where we built our memories was now worth a small fortune, and Richard had debts, many of them. I began to notice small discrepancies in my accounts. Money that disappeared, transfers I didn't authorize. When I questioned him, the explanations were always the same. "Mom, you must have forgotten. It's age. It happens." And then the incidents began: the stove supposedly left on, medications taken at the wrong times, stories that Richard and Caroline told with exaggerated concern to anyone who would listen. I knew exactly what was happening, but I decided to play a different game. When we gathered as a family, I would deliberately forget names, dates, small details. I watched the looks of confirmation exchanged between Richard and Caroline. "It's getting worse," they would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. Little did they know my hearing was as sharp as ever. That's when I realized I needed allies. Michael, my youngest son, was always the rebel of the family. He moved away early, traveled the world, and rarely attended family gatherings. But Michael inherited my intuition. One phone call, a casual conversation, and he sensed something was wrong. "I'm coming home, Mom," he said, without me having to ask. Michael was always like that. He perceived what wasn't said. However, I asked him not to come immediately. I needed to understand how far Richard would go, and more importantly, I needed to gather proof. The appointment with Dr. Palmer, a neurologist recommended by Richard, was the turning point. Sitting in that cold room, with my son holding my hand as if I were a frightened child, I heard the terms incipient dementia and incapacity to make decisions thrown around with disturbing ease. The doctor had barely asked basic questions before agreeing with my son about the need for specialized care. What they didn't know was that, under my wool coat, a small recorder was capturing every word of that conspiracy, and that I, Eleanor Williams, a retired nurse who had worked with dozens of neurologists over for decades, knew the cognitive tests better than they could imagine. I knew exactly which answers to give to seem confused but not completely incapacitated, a delicate balance that would keep Richard confident but prevent an immediate commitment. When we left the office, Richard smiled with satisfaction. "It's going to be okay. Mom, we'll find a nice place for you to live. A place where I would be out of the way, where my house could be sold, where my savings could be freely accessed." What he didn't know was that I was already 10 steps ahead in the game he had started. That night, alone at home, I looked at the family photos on the wall. James smiling on our trip to the Grand Canyon, the young children playing in the yard, frozen moments of a life I believed was solid as a rock. I allowed myself a moment of sadness before calling my old work colleague, Vivian, who now worked as a social worker. "Viv," I said, "I need your help." And a good lawyer. What happened in the following weeks would change everything, not just for me, but for Richard and everyone around us. But before I tell you how I prepared my response to this betrayal, I need you to understand what it means to lose control over your own life after decades of independence. I need you to know what it feels like to see the pity in the eyes of people who believe you are just a confused old woman. And most importantly, I need you to understand why what I did was not revenge, it was justice. If you're enjoying my story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to reveal next will show how a woman of almost 80, underestimated by everyone around her, managed to turn the tables without ever losing her dignity. After that consultation with Dr. Palmer, Richard intensified his plan. I began to notice my mail was being intercepted, bills that never arrived, bank statements that mysteriously disappeared. My son started showing up at the house unannounced, always with a tense smile and seemingly innocent questions. "Mom, did you take your pills today?" he would ask, rummaging through my medicine box as if I were incapable of managing my own health. I, who had spent 4 decades administering medication to critical patients, was now being treated like a careless child. "Yes, Richard," I would reply with a patient smile, while I watched his eyes scan the house for signs of neglect he could use against me. Caroline, my daughter-in-law, was even worse. She rarely visited before, but now she appeared frequently, always with her phone camera ready to record any evidence of my supposed incapacity. "Eleanor, don't you think this house is too big for you alone?" she would comment while photographing a forgotten mug on the table or a book out of place on the shelf. It must be so hard to keep everything clean and organized. What they didn't know was that I was keeping a detailed diary of every visit who came, what they said, what they photographed, what documents they touched when they thought I wasn't looking. My years as a head nurse taught me the importance of precise documentation. Each entry ended with my own observations on my mental and physical state, signed and dated. A small insurance against the lies I knew were being told about me. One day, Richard showed up with some papers. "These are just a few documents to make things easier, Mom," he said, sliding a pen towards me. "Power of attorney for medical emergencies," he added casually. I looked at the papers with my reading glasses and immediately noticed it was much more than that, a broad power of attorney that would give him total control over my finances and property. "Dear, I'm a little tired today. Can I read this carefully and sign it later?" I replied, seeing the momentary irritation cross his face before it was replaced by the patient smile he now always wore with me. "Of course, Mom. Leave it here, and I can stop by tomorrow to pick it up." When he left, I photographed every page of those documents and sent them to Vivian and the lawyer she had introduced me to, Thomas Reynolds. Tom's message arrived in minutes. "Mrs. Williams, do not sign these documents. Let's talk tomorrow." It was during this time that I discovered the true extent of Richard's problems. My granddaughter Lisa, now 19, came to visit me alone, a rare occurrence lately. As we had tea on the porch, she seemed nervous. "Grandma, there's something I think you should know," she began, looking at her own hands. "Dad's in trouble, big trouble. He invested a lot of money in a real estate venture that failed. I heard him and Mom arguing about debts, loans they can't repay." Lisa paused, tears welling up in her eyes. "Last week, I heard them talking about selling your house. Dad said he could convince the doctors that you can't live alone anymore, and then Her voice broke. I didn't think it was fair. You've always been so good to all of us. I held my granddaughter's hands in mine. Lisa, you did the right thing by telling me. Don't worry about me, your grandmother is stronger than she looks. That afternoon, after Lisa left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at the piano James had given me for our 25th anniversary and played Chopin. Music always cleared my mind, and I needed to think clearly. The final confirmation of Richard's betrayal came unexpectedly. My neighbor, Shirley, knocked on my door one afternoon with a worried expression. Shirley and I were never close, just occasional greetings and small talk about the weather, but something was bothering her. Eleanor, I don't know if I should be meddling, but she hesitated. Your son was here yesterday while you were out. He was showing your house to a couple. It seemed like some kind of viewing for potential buyers. When I asked if you were moving, he said you were going to a better place where you would have proper care. I thought it was strange that you hadn't mentioned anything about moving. My heart pounded. But I maintained my composure. Thank you for telling me, Shirley. There must have been some misunderstanding. I smiled, as if I wasn't falling apart inside. After she left, I immediately called Tom Reynolds. They can't sell your house without your signature, Mrs. Williams, he assured me, unless they can legally prove you're incapable of making your own decisions. And that's exactly what they're trying to do, Tom, I replied. The appointment with Dr. Palmer was just the beginning. Richard is building a case against me, step by step. That's when Tom suggested something that initially seemed extreme to me, a complete geriatric evaluation with an independent specialist, not one recommended by Richard, to officially document my mental capacity. Let's create our own set of evidence, Mrs. Williams, before it's too late. I knew what he meant by too late. Once declared incompetent, it would be almost impossible to reverse the situation. My life, my choices, everything would be controlled by my own son, a son I now knew was willing to betray me for money. The pain of this realization was almost physical. In the silent nights, alone in my house, I allowed myself to cry not from fear or helplessness, but from sheer disappointment. I remembered Richard as a little boy, running through the same yard he now wanted to sell, how his eyes lit up when James taught him to ride a bike, how he held my hand in the hospital when his father died. How did we get to this point? I asked the portrait of James on my nightstand. How could my son, the boy I had carried in my arms, nursed, and raised with so much love, now see me only as an obstacle, a means to solve his financial problems? It was during one of these nights of reflection that I received a message from Michael, arriving in 3 days, Mom. Hang in there. The promise of his return gave me renewed strength. Michael was always different from Richard, less interested in status and material possessions, more connected to people and their feelings. If I needed an ally in this battle, I couldn't ask for a better one. The next morning, Richard appeared again, this time with Caroline and an even larger folder of documents. Mom, we found a wonderful place for you, he announced with false enthusiasm, spreading colorful brochures of a nursing home on the kitchen table. It has activities, 24-hour medical assistance. And best of all, you don't have to worry about a thing. I looked at the brochures, at the photos of smiling seniors in wheelchairs, participating in organized activities like children in a daycare. It looks interesting, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. How much does a place like this cost? The question caught them off guard. Don't worry about that, Caroline intervened quickly. We'll take care of everything, with the money from the sale of my house, I completed calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and Caroline exchanged quick glances before he replied in a controlled voice. Mom, this house is too big for you. Maintaining all of this is an unnecessary burden at your age. Selling is the most sensible decision. And what about the money from the sale? I insisted, watching their faces carefully. It would be used to ensure your comfort and care, Richard answered, avoiding my gaze. You know how expensive these places are. I didn't press further. I just smiled and said I needed time to consider the move. They left, visibly relieved, thinking I was gradually giving in. Little did they know that every word of that conversation had been recorded by the small device hidden in the snake plant James had given me on our last anniversary together. That night, I received another blow. Lisa called me, her voice trembling. "Grandma, Dad found out I talked to you. I'm forbidden from visiting you alone. He said you're confused and misinterpreting everything." She began to cry. "I know it's not true. I'm sorry. I can't help you anymore. You've already helped me more than you can imagine, dear," I assured her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't worry about me. Focus on your studies, and remember that your grandmother loves you very much." After hanging up, I did something I had put off for too long. I opened the hidden safe in the back of my bedroom closet, a secret not even James knew, and took out the documents I had kept for decades. Certificates, insurance policies, deeds, and something Richard would never imagine, proof of the minor frauds he had committed over the years, using my name and information for his own benefit. I never planned to use that evidence against my own son. A mother protects, forgives, understands. But now, as I meticulously organized the documents, I understood that sometimes protecting means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. Outside, the sun was setting over the garden that James and I had planted together for decades ago. The roses he loved were beginning to bloom, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around them. Sitting in my rocking chair on the porch, looking at those flowers, I made my decision. Richard thought he was dealing with a frail, confused old woman, easily manipulated and discarded. What he didn't know was that behind my gray hair and wrinkled hands, there was still the same Eleanor Williams who had faced racial prejudice at the hospital where she worked, who had raised 3 children while working night shifts, who had held James's hand during his final moments without shedding a single tear so as not to disturb him. They had underestimated the wrong woman, and they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Michael arrived on a rainy Tuesday, carrying only a worn-out backpack and the same kind eyes he inherited from his father. When I opened the door and saw him on the porch, I felt a relief so profound my legs almost gave way. He hugged me in silence, and in that hug was everything we needed to say. "It's worse than you said on the phone, isn't it?" he asked as we had tea in the kitchen. I just nodded, spreading my folder of evidence on the table. Michael examined every document, every recording, every note I had meticulously made over the past few months. His face transformed as he understood the extent of his brother's betrayal. "This is incomprehensible," he finally murmured. "How could he? How could Caroline?" His voice trembled with indignation. "We're going to the police immediately." I took his hand, calming him. "No, Michael, this won't be resolved at the police station. Richard is my son, just like you. What he's doing is terrible, but it's also calculated to seem legal. An elderly mother, possibly with dementia, a concerned son taking control. In the eyes of the world, he's the hero of this story. So what do we do?" he asked, frustration evident in his voice. "First, we need more proof, undeniable proof." I opened a drawer and took out the small recorder I had been using. "And then, we'll let him hang himself with his own rope." In the following days, we implemented our initial plan. Michael discreetly installed security cameras in key areas of the house, not to protect me from intruders, but to document Richard and Caroline's actions during their visits. Simultaneously, I underwent the complete geriatric evaluation with Dr. Hartman, a renowned specialist in gerontology with no connection to my son. "Mrs. Williams, your results are impressive," she commented at the end of the battery of tests. "Your memory and cognitive functions are significantly above average for your age group. In fact, they are above average for people 20 years younger." She smiled, signing her official report. "If anyone suggests you have dementia or any cognitive impairment, this document says the exact opposite." I left the office with that report like a shield, feeling empowered. But our battle was far from over. Richard, feeling he was losing control of the situation with my sudden resistance and Michael's return, decided to accelerate his plan. The next stage came in the form of a family lunch he organized at his house, the first in months. "To get together like in the old days," he said on the phone, his voice falsely cheerful. Michael and I exchanged glances. We knew it was a trap, but we decided to walk into it with our eyes open. Richard's house was a monument to material success, expensive furniture, art pieces selected not for love but for status, a huge kitchen that was rarely used for real meals. Caroline greeted us with tense smiles, and my grandchildren seemed uncomfortable, especially Lisa, who could barely look me in the eye. During lunch, Richard played the role of the generous host, pouring expensive wine and telling childhood stories with artificial nostalgia. "Remember when Mom confused salt with sugar in that birthday cake?" He laughed, looking at the other guests, a couple I had never met before, vaguely introduced as family friends. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I have never confused salt with sugar in my entire life." "Perhaps you're thinking of someone else, dear." An awkward silence fell over the table. Richard quickly recovered. "See, memory plays tricks on us sometimes. Mom has been having little lapses lately, haven't you, Caroline?" My daughter-in-law nodded with false concern. "Last week, when we visited, she couldn't remember where she had put her medication." "Interesting," Michael intervened, "considering our mother has kept her medication in the same place for decades, in the second kitchen drawer, organized by administration time, as any nurse would." "Perhaps the memory lapse is yours, Caroline." I then realized who the family friends were: a doctor and his wife, strategically invited to witness my supposed decline. The trap was set, but we had come prepared. "Dr. Roberts," Richard said, "you who work in geriatrics, what do you think of these little memory slips? Normal for her age?" Before the doctor could answer, I opened my purse and took out Dr. Hartman's report. "Speaking of health, I had a complete cognitive evaluation last week. Would you like to see the results, Dr. Roberts?" Dr. Hartman is a specialist at Johns Hopkins Hospital. "I'm sure you must know each other professionally." Richard's face visibly paled. Dr. Roberts, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he had been put in, examined the report with genuine interest. "These results are exceptional, Mrs. Williams." Dr. Hartman is indeed one of the best in her field. The rest of the lunch passed in a tense silence, broken only by awkward attempts at trivial conversation. As we were leaving, Richard pulled me aside, his smile gone. "What are you doing, Mom?" he hissed. "Why are you making things difficult?" I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes that once shone with childhood innocence, now hard with ambition and frustration. "I'm protecting what's mine, Richard, just as I always protected you." On the way back, Michael drove in silence, his hands clenched on the steering wheel. "He's not going to give up," he said finally. "You saw the way he looked at you. He's going to try something more drastic." I knew Michael was right. Richard was desperate, cornered by debts and the prospect of losing access to the money he was counting on. Desperate men take desperate measures. The confirmation came 2 days later when Vivian called me in a panic. "Eleanor, Richard has filed a petition for a conservatorship against you in court. He's alleging that you are mentally incompetent and a danger to yourself." I felt the air leave my lungs, but my voice remained steady. "What are the specific allegations?" "He's using Dr. Palmer's initial report, testimonies from Caroline about your supposed confusion, and..." Vivian hesitated. "A recent fire incident at your house." "Fire? There has been no fire at my house. According to the documents, last week you left a pan on the stove that almost caused a fire." Caroline supposedly arrived in time to prevent a tragedy. I closed my eyes, remembering Caroline's visit the week before, how she had insisted on making tea while distracting me with questions. The click of the stove being turned on and then the smoke from the empty pan she forgot on the heat. The whole theater of her panic as she saved the situation. "They're fabricating evidence," I concluded, the reality of the situation weighing on my shoulders. "When is the hearing?" "In 2 weeks. Eleanor, this is serious. If the judge grants the conservatorship, even temporarily, Richard will have legal control over you and your assets." That night, I sat with Michael and Tom Reynolds in my living room, discussing our options. The lawyer was direct. "We have Dr. Hartman's report and your recordings, but we need more. We need to demonstrate A pattern of manipulative behavior by Richard and prove that his actions are motivated by financial interest, not genuine concern. The cameras captured Caroline deliberately creating that pen situation, Michael noted, showing the recording on his laptop. But we need more than that. We need to expose the whole plan. Perhaps, I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. We need to let them think they're winning. Michael looked at me with concern. What are you suggesting, Mom? If Richard wants to see me as fragile and manipulable, maybe it's time to give him exactly that. I turned to Tom. What would happen if I seemed to accept the idea of selling the house and going to a nursing home? If I started signing documents, but with certain modifications? A slow smile spread across the lawyer's face. Documents that seemed to give him what he wants, but actually compromise him. Legally? He shook his head in admiration. Mrs. Williams, that's risky but brilliant. We need to be extremely careful with the execution. In the following days, we worked on our counterplan. Tom prepared special documents that looked like powers of attorney and sale authorizations but contained critical clauses in the fine print clauses that, once signed by Richard, would prove his true intentions and put him at serious legal risk. Simultaneously, I started a video diary, daily recording my clear and lucid thoughts on the situation, documenting every action taken and the reasoning behind it. This is my insurance, I explained to Michael, in case something goes wrong and I am temporarily placed under conservatorship. These recordings will prove I was fully aware and making informed decisions. I also discreetly contacted my old colleagues from the hospital, doctors, nurses, administrators who had worked with me for decades. I'm not asking you to lie for me, I explained to each one, just to testify about my capacity based on your own recent observations. The response was overwhelming. Dr. Jenkins, now chief of surgery, replied immediately, Eleanor, you trained half the doctors in this hospital. Anyone who suggests you are mentally incompetent is either clearly mistaken or has questionable motives. Count on me. A silent army was forming around me, people who knew the real me, who saw beyond the convenient narrative of a concerned son and a confused elderly mother. For the first time in months, I felt I had a real chance to win. Then came the blow we didn't expect. Richard hired a private investigator to follow Michael, looking for anything he could use to discredit him. What he found was the past Michael had tried to leave behind, a period of substance abuse in his youth, now overcome for years, but which could tarnish his credibility as my protector. He's going to use this against you at the hearing, Tom warned when we found out. He'll claim Michael is manipulating you to get access to your money to fund an old addiction. Michael looked devastated. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have known he would use this. I held my youngest son's face in my hands. Michael, do you think I didn't know? A mother always knows. You faced your demons and won, and I'm more proud of that than any degree. Richard hung on the wall. It was in that moment, seeing the pain in Michael's eyes at his own brother's betrayal, that I made my final decision. This was no longer just about protecting my house or my money. It was about justice, not just for me, but for everyone Richard had manipulated and hurt along the way. Tom, I said, my voice firmer than ever, I want a countersuit. Richard wants to put me under conservatorship? Let's show the court exactly who needs supervision in this family. The lawyer looked at me with new respect. Mrs. Williams, are you prepared for the consequences? This will expose everything, the entire family in court. I am prepared, I replied. When you live for almost 8 decades in this world, you learn that some things are worth more than appearances. The truth is one of them. That night, Michael and I had dinner together in silence. The weight of the decisions made and the difficult days ahead hung over us. As we washed the dishes side by side, a simple routine that suddenly felt precious, Michael asked me, do you think we can ever be a family again, after all this? I looked out the kitchen window at the yard where my sons had played together, where James had built a tree house, where we had celebrated so many birthdays and holidays. I don't know, dear. Some wounds heal, others leave permanent scars. But I know I'm doing what needs to be done. Later, alone in my room, I looked at the photograph of James on my nightstand. "I hope you're proud of me," I whispered, to his smile frozen in time. "Because tomorrow, the real battle begins." What Richard didn't know was that while he was planning to strip me of my autonomy and dignity, I was silently gathering an army. And that army was about to march. The week before the hearing was a whirlwind of activity. Tom Reynolds turned my dining room into a makeshift command center, with documents spread across the old table where my family had shared countless meals. The irony did not escape me. The same piece of furniture that had witnessed moments of family unity now served to document its rupture. "The strategy has three fronts," Tom explained, organizing the papers into meticulous piles. "First, completely discredit the claims of cognitive incapacity with Dr. Hartman's report and the testimonies of your former colleagues. Second, demonstrate the pattern of manipulation and fabrication of evidence by Richard and Caroline. Third, expose the financial motive behind it all." Michael, sitting beside me, took detailed notes. His presence had become my pillar of strength, constant, unwavering, loyal. "What about the camera recordings?" he asked. "Will they be admitted as evidence?" Tom frowned. "It's complicated. They were installed on your private property, which helps our case. But the defense will try to argue they were edited or tampered with in some way. I have the original copies with intact date and timestamps," Michael assured him. "And I can testify about the installation of the cameras." "Excellent," Tom replied, before turning to me with a serious expression. "Mrs. Williams, I must warn you, Richard will likely play dirty. He will try to paint Michael as an opportunist with a history of substance abuse. He will manipulate family memories to make you seem confused. He will try to create a division between you two." I smiled faintly, feeling a strange calm. "Tom, I spent 40 years working in hospital emergency rooms. I've seen people at their worst, under extreme pressure. Richard may have forgotten who he's dealing with, but I haven't forgotten who I am." That night, after Tom left, Michael and I took a long walk around the neighborhood. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and newly lit fireplaces. We walked in comfortable silence, as we used to do when he was a teenager and needed to talk about something difficult. "He wasn't always like this," I said finally, watching the house lights come on around us. "Richard, I mean, as a child, he was so sensitive, so concerned about others." Michael nodded. "I remember. He taught me how to ride a bike when you and Dad were working. He was so patient. What happens to people, Michael? How do we change so much along the way?" He considered the question for a moment. "Maybe it's small choices, one after another. Small compromises with what we think we want, until we no longer recognize our own values." I thought about this as we continued walking. I had made my own choices throughout my life. Some I regretted, others I would make again without hesitation. Did Richard see his current actions as necessary, justifiable? Or did he know, deep down, that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return? As we returned home, we found a surprise waiting on the porch. Aiden, my 21-year-old grandson, Richard's son, sitting on the steps with a determined expression. "Grandma," he said, standing up quickly, "we need to talk." Inside, I then revealed that he had discovered his parents' plans by accidentally finding documents in his father's office. "They're planning to sell this house immediately after they get the conservatorship. They already have a buyer waiting, a developer who wants to tear everything down and build luxury homes." Michael slammed his fist on the table. "They weren't even planning to keep it as a family home after everything Mom and Dad built here." Aiden shook his head, clearly uncomfortable betraying his parents' trust, but determined to do what he felt was right. "There's more. Dad is in much bigger trouble than just debt. I overheard a conversation. It seems he made some questionable investments, possibly illegal. He's under investigation." This revelation changed everything. Richard wasn't just desperate for money, he was potentially running from legal consequences. The quick sale of my house could be as much about raising funds as it was about transferring assets before they were frozen. "Aiden," I asked carefully, "would you be willing to testify about this?" My grandson hesitated, the conflict evident on his young face. "Grandma, They're my parents. But what they're doing to you, it's not right. He took a deep breath. Yes, I'll testify if it's necessary. After I then left, promising to keep us informed of any new developments, Michael and I sat in contemplative silence. My grandson's decision to stand against his own parents was both a testament to his character and a painful reminder of how this situation had fractured our family. We need to tell Tom about this, Michael said finally. It changes our strategy. I agreed, but something else was forming in my mind, a plan within the plan. If Richard was truly involved in illegal activities, perhaps there was a way to use this not just to defend myself, but to force him to confront the consequences of his choices. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I called Martin Cooper, an old friend who had retired as a financial fraud detective. Martin and his wife Grace had been close friends of mine and James's. Saturday dinners, shared vacations, the kind of friendship that survives decades. Eleanor, what a wonderful surprise. His deep voice sounded over the phone. Grace and I were just talking about you the other day, wondering how you were, Martin. I need your help, I replied, without beating around the bush. It's about Richard. For an hour, I explained the whole situation. Martin listened without interrupting, the silence occasionally broken by his heavy sighs. When I finished, his voice was heavy with restrained indignation. I'll make some discreet calls, he promised. I still have contacts in the department. If Richard is under investigation, I can find out the details without raising red flags. Martin. I hesitated. I don't want to harm my son. I just want to protect myself, Eleanor, he replied gently. If Richard is involved in financial fraud, the damage has already been done by him. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. Martin's words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. As a mother, my instinct had always been to protect my children, even as adults. But had I allowed that instinct to blind me to Richard's flaws? Had I, by trying to shield him from disappointments and failures over the years, inadvertently contributed to the man he had become? 2 days later, Martin returned with information that confirmed our suspicions. Richard was indeed under investigation for investment fraud, using money from new investors to pay dividends to earlier investors, a classic pyramid scheme. The investigation was still in its preliminary stages, but the evidence was substantial. He's sinking, Eleanor, Martin said gravely, and he's willing to drag you down with him to buy time. That night, I sat alone on the porch, lulled by the familiar creak of the rocking chair James had built. The stars shone coldly above, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding under their distant light. I thought of all the nights I had spent in this very spot, rocking babies, comforting children with scraped knees, waiting for teenagers who had missed curfew, sharing a glass of wine with James on warm summer nights. This place was not just a house, a structure of wood and concrete. It was the repository of a lifetime of memories. And now, I had to make a decision that could permanently change my relationship with one of my sons. The next morning, I gathered Michael, Tom, and Martin in my kitchen. On the table, I placed a sealed envelope I had prepared during the night. This is my plan, I said, my voice firm. We're going to offer Richard a way out. A way out? Tom seemed confused. After everything he's tried to do? Yes, I confirmed. Inside this envelope is a proposal. Richard withdraws the conservatorship petition and signs a document relinquishing any future claim on my house or assets. In return, I will not turn over the evidence of his suspicious financial activities to the authorities. Michael looked at me with a complex expression: surprise, admiration, and perhaps a touch of uncertainty. Mom, are you sure? That's almost blackmail, I completed with a small smile. No, dear, it's a family negotiation. And if Richard refuses, we proceed with our original plan and let justice take its natural course, both in family court and criminal court. Martin nodded slowly. He'd be crazy to refuse. You're essentially offering him a lifeline, a conditional lifeline, Tom added, understanding the strategy. And legally viable, as long as it's worded correctly. And if he accepts? Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. Does he just get away with Everything he tried to do to you? I placed my hand on his. No, Michael. No one really gets away with anything in this life. Richard will have to live with the knowledge that his own mother discovered his plan and stopped him. He will have to look at his own children knowing they saw his true nature. Some punishments are invisible, but no less real for it. That afternoon, I sent the envelope by courier to Richard's office. The ball was now in his court. While we waited for his response, we continued to prepare our case for the hearing, which was only 3 days away. I knew Richard would be going through his own torment now, weighing his options, calculating risks, possibly consulting lawyers about his legal exposure. Part of me felt a deep ache for that. The same ache I felt when he fell off his first bike or came home after being rejected by his first teenage crush. But another part of me, the part that had been forged by decades of struggle and perseverance, knew that this moment was necessary. Sometimes, true love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences, but ensuring they face them while there is still time for change and redemption. On the eve of the hearing, when the tension in our house had reached its peak, the doorbell rang. Michael answered the door and returned with a stunned expression, holding an envelope similar to the one I had sent. "It's from Richard," he said, handing me the envelope. With slightly trembling fingers, I opened it and read its contents. Richard's response was not what any of us expected. "He wants to meet me," I announced, looking at the worried faces around me. "Alone? Tonight?" "Absolutely not," Michael protested immediately. "It's too dangerous," Tom agreed. "Mrs. Williams, I strongly advise against it. It could be a trap to get something he can use against you tomorrow." I looked at the letter again, at the all too familiar handwriting, the same I had praised on school report cards, the same that had signed Mother's Day cards for so many years. There was something in the studied formality of the words that told me this was a decisive moment. "I'll meet him," I decided. "But don't worry, I won't be reckless. If you've been following my story this far, know that what happened that night would change everything, not just the outcome of the hearing, but the future course of our family. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives occur not in courtrooms or before witnesses, but in quiet conversations when we finally face the truths we've tried so long to avoid." And as I prepared to meet my eldest son, the man who had planned to take my autonomy and dignity, I felt a strange calm, because, regardless of what happened next, I had already won the most important battle, the battle for my own voice. The restaurant Richard chose was neutral, a small Italian place in the old part of town, nearly empty on a Tuesday night. He was already seated at a back table when I walked in, his face lit only by the single candle in the center. "Thank you for coming, Mom," he said as I sat down. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, formalities that now seemed to belong to another life, another relationship. I observed my eldest son with new eyes, the deep lines of worry on his forehead, the graying at his temples that wasn't there the last time I truly looked at him, the wedding band he nervously twisted on his finger. This man, this familiar stranger, was born from my body. I had counted his fingers and toes in the maternity ward, wiped his tears, and celebrated his achievements. And now here we were, adversaries on a silent battlefield. "I received your proposal," he began without preamble. His voice was controlled, professional, as if we were in a business meeting. "Quite unexpected. No more unexpected than your attempt to commit me against my will and sell my house," I replied calmly, keeping my tone low. No waiter needed to overhear our conversation. Richard had the decency to look away. "Things got out of hand." "No, Richard, things don't just get out of hand. People make conscious choices repeatedly." My voice remained steady, not accusatory, just stating facts. "You chose to lie about my mental health. You chose to fabricate evidence. You chose to betray the trust I placed in you as my son. You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he replied, a hint of desperation slipping through his composed facade. "The investments, the debts, I understand perfectly." Martin Cooper explained it all very well. The mention of Martin's name made Richard visibly pale. "You spoke to Martin?" "Yes. Apparently, you're not the only one with useful connections. I took a sip of the water the waiter had served. A Ponzi scheme, Richard? Seriously? Your father would have been devastated. He pressed his lips into a thin line, his hands now perfectly still on the table. It didn't start that way. It was just a temporary loan of funds from one investment to cover losses in another. I was going to pay it all back when the market recovered. That's what they all say. Isn't it? I shook my head. But we're not here to talk about your financial fraud. We're here to resolve the situation between us. Richard took the envelope he had brought and slid it across the table. I signed the documents. Formal withdrawal of the conservatorship petition, waiver of any claims to your assets. As you requested, I opened the envelope and quickly scanned the papers. Everything seemed to be in order, exactly as Tom had drafted it. And the investigation? Richard asked, vulnerability finally showing in his voice. What do you intend to do? I put the documents back in the envelope before answering. Nothing. Nothing. The authorities are already investigating, Richard. Independent of me. What happens now depends entirely on you. You can run. You can fight. You can negotiate a plea. Those are your choices to make. He stared at me, confused. But in your letter, you implied you could interfere, use your influence. I said I would not turn over the additional evidence I have, and I won't. I leaned forward, but I also won't lie for you or obstruct an ongoing investigation. I never promised that. The realization of what I was saying slowly registered on his face. So this deal, it's just about you and the house? Yes, I am protecting what is mine, my autonomy, my home, my future. As for your future, Richard, it's in your own hands. As it always has been, really. He dropped his gaze to the table, defeated in a way I had never seen before. Why are you doing this? You could have destroyed me completely, exposed everything, sent me to prison, because I'm your mother. I answered simply. I won't save you from the consequences of your actions, but I won't add to your burden either. The justice system will decide what is appropriate for your crimes. My only concern was to stop you from committing another one against me. In that moment, something in Richard's face changed. The mask of the controlled businessman fell away completely, and I saw a flash of the boy he had once been, vulnerable, scared, seeking approval. I really thought I was protecting you at first, he said, his voice almost a whisper. You were alone in that huge house, and I was worried. But then the debts started piling up, and the investors started asking questions, and I thought, just this once, it would be a solution for both of us. A solution that would have deprived me of everything I value, I observed. My independence, my home. I know. He ran his hands over his face. I convinced myself I was helping you. It's amazing how we can justify almost anything to ourselves. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of family relationship hanging between us. Finally, I reached out and briefly touched his hand, not a gesture of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. What will you tell Caroline and the children? I asked. The truth, I suppose. At least part of it. That I dropped the conservatorship. That you and I came to an understanding. He hesitated. Caroline doesn't know the full extent of my financial problems. That's going to be difficult. She actively participated in the plan against me, Richard. Don't underestimate her. He nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've underestimated a lot of people lately, including you. A common mistake, I replied with a small smile. People see gray hair and wrinkles and forget the person behind them. The person who still has clarity, purpose, and above all, dignity. As we left the restaurant, standing under the dim light of a lamppost on the sidewalk, Richard seemed unsure of how to proceed. In other circumstances, there would have been a hug, a goodbye kiss. Now there was just an awkward space between us, filled with all that had been lost. What happens now? He finally asked. Between us, I mean, that depends on you, Richard. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. But I don't close doors permanently. I never have with any of you. He nodded, understanding what I didn't say explicitly. The path back would be long and entirely his responsibility. I think I'll face what's coming, he said at last. Whatever the investigation, whatever the outcome, It's a start, I replied. I returned home that night with a strange feeling, not quite victory, not complete relief, but something close to resolution. Michael was waiting anxiously in the living room, standing up the moment I opened the door. How did it go? Did he agree? Are we safe? I showed him the signed documents. It's done. The hearing will be cancelled tomorrow. The power of attorney is void. The house is safe. Michael let out a deep sigh before hugging me. You're amazing. You know that? The strongest person I've ever known. The next morning, as promised, Richard's lawyer filed the formal withdrawal of the conservatorship petition. Tom Reynolds was beaming when he called with the news. It's over, Mrs. Williams. You won. But had I really won? Sitting on my porch that afternoon, looking at the same flower beds James and I had planted together, I felt the bittersweet weight of what had happened. My home was safe, my autonomy preserved, but a family had been fractured, perhaps irrevocably. A week later, the other shoe dropped. The local news announced the investigation into Richard's fraudulent investment scheme. His face appeared on television, tense, haggard, aged, as he was escorted out of his office. I turned off the TV, unable to watch. Michael, who had stayed with me through all of this, found me crying silently in the kitchen. Mom, he said softly, you didn't do this. He brought this upon himself. I know, I replied, wiping my tears. But it still hurts. It will always hurt. In the days that followed, our house became an unexpected refuge. Lisa and I then showed up at our door, confused and hurt by their father's sudden downfall and the scandals surrounding them. Caroline had left for her sister's house, leaving them to process everything alone. Why would he do this, Grandma? Lisa asked, her eyes red from crying. He had everything: a family, respect, a career. People sometimes lose sight of what truly matters, I answered, hugging her. They start chasing things they believe they need, forgetting what they already have. I then, ever more pragmatic, was concerned with practical matters. What now? College, the house, everything is in jeopardy. Michael intervened. We'll take it one day at a time. No one in this family will be left helpless. It was in that conversation that I realized the true victory in all of this: not Richard's defeat or the preservation of my house, but the reunion of the scattered parts of our family that still cared for each other, that still believed in mutual support and dignity. 3 months after that night in the restaurant, I received a letter from Richard. It was written from the detention center where he was awaiting trial after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud. His words were simple, direct, without the layers of self-justification that had characterized our last interactions. Mom, he wrote, I'm not asking for forgiveness or for help. I just want you to know that I finally understand what you tried to teach us our whole lives about integrity, about dignity, about facing the consequences of our choices. It took me too long to learn this lesson, and the price was too high. But I am learning. As I folded the letter and put it away in my desk, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Richard would face the next several years in prison. Our family would never be the same. And yet, somehow, there was a resolution that carried its own form of peace. That night, I invited Michael, Lisa, and I Dan for a special dinner. I cooked the roast I used to make when they were little, using the recipe my own mother had taught me. Seated around the table where so many family meals had been shared before, we toasted with the wine James had saved for special occasions. To family, I said, raising my glass. Not the one we imagined having, but the one we truly have, with all its imperfections and hardships. To Grandma, Lisa replied, with tears in her eyes, who taught us what it means to have courage and dignity, even when it seems impossible. Later, when everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I sat in my favorite chair with the old family photo album. There we all were, James and I, young and hopeful, the children growing up page by page, birthdays, graduations, weddings, a lifetime captured in still images. At some point, I fell asleep with the album in my lap, and I dreamed of James. We were sitting on this same porch, but we were young again, watching the children play in the yard. You did well, Eleanor. he said to me in the dream, his smile exactly as I remembered. You stayed true to yourself. I woke to the first light of morning filtering through the curtains, feeling a deep certainty. Life rarely follows the path we plan. Families break and reconfigure. People we love can disappoint us profoundly. But through it all, the one thing no one can take from us unless we let them is our dignity, our sense of who we are and what we stand for. Richard had made his choices, and now he was facing them. I had made mine, and I was at peace with them. That morning, I did something I had long planned but had never found the courage to do. I took my notebook and began to write my memoirs, not just for my grandchildren and their future children, but for myself. To affirm that my story mattered, that my experiences had value, that my voice deserved to be heard. Because in the end, perhaps that is the true victory against anyone who tries to diminish us, not just to survive, but to tell our own story, on our own terms, with all the truth and dignity we can muster. 6 months have passed since that night at the Italian restaurant. Life finds its own rhythm, even after the most intense storms. The seasons have changed, and with them, many other things as well. Richard was sentenced to 7 years in prison for financial fraud. 7 years! Enough time for a newborn to learn to walk, talk, read, and start school. Enough time for Lisa to finish college. Enough time for all of us to learn to live with the void he left in our lives. The first time I visited him in prison was harder than I had imagined. Seeing my son, who once wore Italian suits and expensive watches, dressed in a faded gray uniform, separated from me by a thick pane of glass, made me question everything. Could I have done something differently? As a mother, had I failed him in some fundamental way? Don't do that, Mom, he said, as if he could read my thoughts. Don't blame yourself. I made my choices. Every single one of them. We talked for 20 minutes about the weather, about Lisa and Aiden, about the books he was reading in the prison library. Safe, neutral topics. When we said goodbye, he placed his hand on the glass, and I placed mine on the other side. Will you come again? He asked, uncertainty in his voice. Yes, I replied. I'm your mother. That never changes. Caroline filed for divorce shortly after Richard's conviction. I can't say I was surprised. She had always been pragmatic. With their house seized and assets frozen, she moved back to Chicago to be near her family. I then decided to stay, transferring to a local university and moving into a small apartment I helped pay for. Lisa was already in her final year of college, so she stayed where she was, coming home on weekends when she could. Michael stayed with me for another 3 months before returning to his own life in Seattle. Before he left, he brought me a gift, a modern security system for the house, with cameras and monitoring I could control from my phone. I know you're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself, he said as he installed the equipment, but it would give me peace of mind too. Know you have this as a backup. I accepted the gift for what it was, not a statement about my abilities, but an expression of love. Sometimes letting others help us is as important as proving we can manage on our own. The real surprise came from Vivian, my old nursing colleague. After the whole situation with Richard, she suggested we get together with other retired nurses to form a support group for seniors in our community. Eleanor, you're not the only one facing these challenges, she explained during one of our weekly lunches. There are so many seniors being manipulated by family members or who simply don't know their rights. We can make a difference. That's how what we affectionately call the Guardians was born, a group of 5 retired nurses, all over 70, offering guidance, support, and advocacy for vulnerable seniors in our community. We started modestly, with meetings at the local library, but soon we were working in partnership with lawyers, social workers, and even the financial crimes unit of the local police. Martin Cooper, my old detective friend, gave a talk at one of our sessions. Seniors are frequent targets, he explained to the packed room. Not because they are weak or incapable, but because they often have what criminals want: lifelong accumulated assets, good credit scores, and unfortunately, in some cases, family members who place financial gain above morality. After the talk, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. My son is doing Exactly what happened to you, she whispered. I've been so scared. I didn't know what to do. I took her trembling hands in mine. You are not alone anymore. We will help you face this. Every person we helped was a small victory against the kind of injustice I had almost suffered. Every senior who managed to keep their independence, their dignity, their home, healed a little piece of the wound Richard had left in my heart. Tom Reynolds, the lawyer who had helped me, began offering free legal consultations to our group once a month. What you're doing is important, he told me. You're changing lives. We're just giving back, I replied, using our experience for something positive. At home, I made changes too. I turned Richard's old room into an office for our group, with a computer, printer, and meticulously organized files. Michael's room became a space for my own projects, painting, a passion I had abandoned when I started working as a nurse, and writing my memoirs. Lisa started visiting me more often, frequently bringing college friends to meet the rebellious grandma, as she affectionately started calling me. During one of these visits, she confessed to me, "Did you know I'm thinking about studying law? Specifically, elder law." I smiled, feeling a pride I hadn't expected. Your grandfather would have loved that. I think what happened with you and Dad made me realize how important this field is, she explained. How many people don't have the resources or the strength you had to fight back? She was right, of course. I had advantages many don't: decades of medical experience, friends in strategic positions, a loyal son like Michael, financial resources to hire a good lawyer. But I also had something that everyone can cultivate: the refusal to be silenced or diminished, the determination to keep my dignity intact, no matter the cost. On the first anniversary of the whole ordeal, I hosted a special dinner. Michael flew in from Seattle. Lisa and I then came from college. Vivian and the other guardians attended, as did Tom Reynolds and Martin Cooper. It was an unusual gathering, not quite family, not just friends, but something unique and precious we had forged together. As I watched everyone chatting animatedly around the table that James had built for our family decades ago, I felt a sense of fullness I never expected to find again. A toast, I proposed, raising my glass. Everyone fell silent, waiting for my words. 2 second acts. 2 second acts. They replied in unison, and I saw in their eyes something priceless: genuine respect. Vivian stayed after everyone had left, helping me wash the dishes and put away the leftovers. You seem happy, Eleanor, she observed. Despite everything. Not despite everything, I corrected. Because of everything. Before, I was just existing, maintaining this house, visiting my grandchildren occasionally, living in memories. Now, I'm truly living, making a difference, creating something new. You know what's most incredible? She asked. You turned a betrayal into a movement, a personal pain into a collective purpose. Her words stayed with me in the days that followed. Transformation. Wasn't that what life constantly asked of us? Not just to withstand the storms, but to use the winds to carry us to new places. On my next visit to Richard, I brought photos of our group, of our projects, of the seniors we had helped. He examined each one carefully. You've created something beautiful from what I did, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Like you always have, your whole life. We all have choices, Richard, I replied. Every day, every hour. And it's never too late to make different choices. He nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. I'm teaching financial literacy classes here, for the other inmates, explaining how the system works, how to avoid pitfalls, how to build an honest future when they get out. It's not much, but it's a start. I finished, feeling an unexpected spark of pride. Perhaps some lessons, however painful, truly do transform us. Today, at 81, I look at the path I've traveled with a clarity that only age can bring. I lost a lot along the way, James, the trust in my eldest son, the united family I once believed I had. But I also gained things I never imagined: a new purpose, a community of mutual support, a voice stronger and clearer than I ever had. I've learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in how we get up. It's not in never being betrayed, but in how we respond to betrayal. It's not in never being underestimated, but in how we defy the low expectations of others. And above all, I learned that dignity is not something others can take from us, it's something we fiercely protect, that we affirm daily through our actions and choices. Richard still has 4 years of his sentence to serve. Lisa is in her second year of law school. Aiden has graduated and started his own small tech company. Michael visits me every 3 months, and we talk on the phone every week. The Guardians now have chapters in 3 different cities, and we are lobbying for legislative changes to better protect the rights of the elderly. As for me, I continue to live in this house full of memories, some sweet, some bitter, all mine. I continue to paint, write, advocate. I continue to hold space in my heart for a son who lost his way, but who maybe, just maybe, is finding a new one. And every night, before I sleep, I touch the wedding ring James gave me and whisper a thank you. Not just for him and the years we shared, but for the strength I discovered when I needed it most, strength that was always there, waiting to be tested. They tried to destroy me, but they ended up revealing me to myself. And that, perhaps, is the sweetest revenge of all, not just to survive, but to flourish. Not just to resist, but to grow. Not just to exist, but to truly live, with every wrinkle of experience, every white hair, every emotional scar as medals of a life fully inhabited. If my story moved you, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel, because there are so many Eleanors out there fighting their own battles in silence. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing our stories, we can remind each other that age may bring vulnerability, but it also brings a wisdom and a resilience that no one should ever underestimate.